Hello, and welcome to The Art of Aging, a part of our podcast series from the Center for Abundant Aging and United Church Homes. I love having these conversations with others as we look at what it means to age in the 21st century, encouraging positive and empowering conversations that challenge, encourage, and inspire all to age with abundance. Today, our guest is, my conversation partner is Liz Stamm. She is board-certified music therapist and a licensed professional music therapist in the state of Ohio. She has her master's degree in health administration, and she works for the Ohio Masonic Communities and has worked to build a music therapy program across the continuum of care at their 3 branches in Waterville, Medina, and Springfield. Liz is passionate about promoting humanistic practices within healthcare and advocating for the field of music therapy. We're having this conversation with Liz, besides the fact that she's a very cool person, and I personally am very interested in music therapy. But Liz is going to be one of the speakers, one of the presenters at our symposium coming up in October 2025. And the symposium is Igniting Creative Potential, the Aging Superpower. And we're going to be taking a look at the intersections of creativity, healing, and breaking down stereotypes about aging. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Great. So it's always really interesting for us, for me, to find out what led you to this work and why focus on older adults, because obviously music therapy is used in a wide variety of fields and with different populations.
Absolutely. I became a music therapist in December 2020. I finished my undergrad degree and my clinical internship in November 2020. And I initially worked in inpatient psych and forensic psych. And I really loved those settings. And I also had the opportunity to work in substance use recovery as well. And I really am passionate about those populations. And I had the opportunity then to go back and get my master's in health administration because I wanted to do a little bit more than what I was doing as a clinician. I wanted to empower other clinicians and work with the decision makers within a company who are orchestrating the care, and somewhere in there find a way to advocate for the field of music therapy as well. And so it just turned out that after I finished my master's, I met somebody who worked for the Ohio Masonic Communities and had this vision, and it aligned with mine. And here I am now, almost 3 years later.
And what a time to be entering your professional world, literally in the heart, in the middle of the pandemic. So, yeah. So before we go any further, would you explain to us what music therapy is? Because I think some of us have a general idea, but we may not have a more specific understanding, true understanding of the work that you do and how you go about this and what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. I always like to give my elevator pitch. And so it's a very abridged version of a definition, but then I will give the American Music Therapy Association definition as well. If I'm in an elevator with somebody and they go, "What does a music therapist do?" I always tell people that I utilize music to address non-musical goals. So that could be alleviating physical discomfort, decreasing agitation, improving orientation to the current space and time, which is extremely prevalent in older adults living with Alzheimer's dementia or other types of dementia, working to improve healthy socialization or communication. You name it, I say this way too often, but you name it, there's a way a music therapist can find a way to address it. I think we're pretty cool people. I love our modality of care. And I love talking about music therapy. So I will then share the American Music Therapy Association definition as well. So they state that music therapy is the clinical and evidence-based use of music interventions to accomplish individualized goals within a therapeutic relationship by a credentialed professional who has completed an approved music therapy program. Music therapy interventions can address a variety of healthcare and educational goals, including promoting wellness, managing stress, alleviating pain, enhancing memory, promoting physical rehabilitation, and so much more. End quote. So music therapists, I always say, can oftentimes, prenatal to end of life care. We can work with individuals or in group settings to figure out where that clinical applicability is and figure out what interventions we need to use to address those needs. And we have an entire clinical process, therapeutic process. So it starts with oftentimes a referral, whether that's a family member or another clinician. And then we have an assessment. We do treatment planning. We do a lot of interdisciplinary work as well with other clinicians, and then we document everything. And then we also have a termination process if services are no longer needed or applicable or beneficial clinically. So that therapeutic process is very important.
So you've had training in therapy. You come with some musical training yourself. Is that correct? And is that true of all music therapists?
Yes. So undergrad degrees or equivalency degrees. So we have a combined training of psychology courses. We at least have one anatomy course. We obviously are also classically trained. And then we also have, so we have lessons, we have to be in ensembles. And throughout undergrad, we have proficiencies to make sure we are meeting the expectations for proper clinical musicianship, so that when we are going into internship and becoming independent clinicians, we are meeting the standards of practice.
But it doesn't matter if the client, the person you're working with, has any kind of musical background, correct?
Correct. The amount of times I hear clients say comments along the lines of, "Oh, I can't carry a tune in a bucket. You don't want to work with me." Or my fifth grade choir teacher told me I should never sing, so I don't sing. And it's an honor that I get to work with people to kind of unpack that and figure out how to uplift somebody, because music is an incredible way to communicate with one another and to connect. And not everybody feels that way, and that's okay. But a client does not have to be musically inclined or a prodigy to benefit from music therapy.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like you're having to deal with our culture's definition of who who are musicians, and I think in our culture today that there's an assumption that if you can't sing as a solo person on a stage in front of lots of people and get good comments, that you don't deserve to be called a musician. And just your relating, having to help people understand that what their fifth grade teacher told them is not have to, it's sad that it's defined their lives, but it doesn't have to define their lives forever. That in and of itself requires a certain amount of therapy that you have to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I use the word empowerment a lot just because there are so many circumstances in our lives, and it's that, beat us down or make us feel lesser than. And whether it's intentional or not from other people, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. And we as humans have a great capacity to remember the things that hurt us the most. Somebody, we hear all the time, somebody could say 10 wonderful things about you, but that thing that your fifth grade music teacher said to you is going to stick with you forever. And so I, work really hard to uplift and empower my clients any way that I can. And working to also highlight the fact that music doesn't have to be perfect for it to be enjoyable, right? And that's why I know we're going to talk about improvisation later. I particularly really enjoy that because music is a great form of self-expression, and sometimes expression is messy. Sometimes it's not always, consonance. Sometimes it's dissonance.
So talk to me, you're going to be participating in our symposium, and where we're talking about creativity. So what is the intersection for you between the creativity that you're doing? Therapy in and of itself is creative. People probably don't think of it that way. Music is creative, and how are you using those to get the healing outcomes that you together with the client are determining is helpful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of it is I focus on humanism a lot, whereas, I see the entire person. And then I also work really hard to be persistent and making sure, that we are working with people, and people are messy, and we all have our stuff. And this generation in particular, we're talking about, quote unquote, older adults. It's a specific generation, oftentimes defined, 65 and up. And if you think about the history of this generation, something that when I was preparing for this interview and for the summit coming up in October, I kept racking my brain. It's, why do I love what I do? Why do I, what's this one group that I do? It's called Meeting in the Music. And it's a group that I offer once a month for independent living, assisted living, and I even have residents from our skilled nursing and long-term care who come over. And it's a combination of lyric analysis, guided discussion, and song recreation, where I compile a list of a few songs that relate to a specific topic, such as change, grief, friendship, aging. And it promotes this incredible discussion. And the discussion in and of itself is rather notable, because this is a generation of people who have experienced notable traumas, right? Back to back to back, whether it was wars or political turmoil, civil rights, and so much more, where these individuals were just pushed. It was the time, at the time, people weren't encouraged to talk about their feelings. You just have to keep going. You experience it. That's just life. This is what happens. You just keep going. You keep working. And the amount of times now in groups, I've had people say, no one's ever asked me how I feel, or I never thought about it that way. You make me think. And then they keep coming back to every single group, because it's this safe space now that we've created together to talk about challenging experiences in a constructive manner and through music-based interventions, which is pretty neat. So it's a lot of determination and flexibility as well. I think understanding that, these are humans and they all are going to perceive the same situation a little bit differently. So how do I meet them in the middle, and find a way to bring a level of understanding, if that makes sense?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really interested in is this recognition that there's no one music center in the brain. And is that a part of what makes the use of music in these therapies so helpful? Because it's connecting to, music is connected to our emotions, to our reasoning, to our intellect, to our memories, to our imagining. I hadn't heard before that you have to take an anatomy class, and I would imagine that just having to know the parts of the brain and what they do and how music also affects all those, is how all that comes together, is really pretty magical, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Yes, yeah. So an anatomy class was very challenging at times, but it was really cool. And then, of course, all of the psychology courses that we have to take as well. My personal favorite was abnormal psychology, which makes a lot of sense working in inpatient psych and forensics. Like I was particularly passionate about forensics for sure, but that's a whole other can of worms for another time.
Yeah, I'd love to have you conversation about that. I'm really curious. But we'll stay here at music therapy for right now.
Yes. But yeah, well, and you were talking about, like cognition and expression, and how music impacts and connects with different parts of our brains, but also physiologically, right? How we have those autonomic responses, or responses that they just happen. So maybe tapping our toes, maybe we don't realize we're doing it. And that's something that I'm often looking for in interactions, especially in a dementia care setting, right? Is even if somebody's not able to verbally express to me, they can still look at me. They can still smile at me. They can tap their fingers or hold my hand or tap their toes. That means they're with me. They're entrained. And that's a really meaningful response, when oftentimes these are individuals, especially in late stage dementia, who are unable to connect with their environment in meaningful ways, at least in other settings. So I find the work that I have the honor to do very meaningful, and I do love talking about it.
Can you share one or two examples of outcomes that inspire you to keep doing this work, and when you can see the sparks happening in real time when you're working with folks?
Yeah. So one in particular I really want to share is this was not in the dementia care setting. This was in long-term care, and so I had a client. He had Parkinson's, and he had been an accomplished musician, and he had not engaged musically for 7 or 8 years after his diagnosis. It was really traumatic and really struggling with it. And I got a referral to work with this person. And he had come to one of my groups that I had talked about, my meeting in the music group. And he had been so insightful, and he was so open and really benefited the discussion. And so then I got a referral to work with him one-to-one. And it became one of the most incredible therapeutic relationships I've had the honor of engaging in. This person was learning how to navigate their body through a huge change, and was navigating to a new living situation, no longer living at home and not living with their spouse anymore. It was really challenging. And one of the goals that they had shared in a session, oftentimes we were sitting in their room and would talk, and I would recreate songs related to the things we were discussing. And at one point, he expressed the interest in going to a piano again someday. And he had been playing since he was really young and was very into improvisation, which is a wonderful interest of mine as well. And I took him to a piano, and his spouse was with him, and he sat down and he played with me. And I didn't know until after the session that was the first time he had sat at a piano and played in 7 years.
Wow.
And it was just, I could feel the energy in the room. And obviously I'm so focused on that therapeutic interaction with this person. But it was incredibly meaningful. And it was also a very heavy moment too, because this person, like I said, they're navigating the changes in their body, and being able to perform at a certain level for so long. And then now seeing those changes, it took some time to unpack, but the overall meaningfulness that it had for this person in their healing process, it was something we continued to explore. And also with the spouse as well, talking about how she perceived that experience. And so sometimes it's healing those musical traumas too. We talk about the music teachers, but we can joke about that sometimes, because we're like, we're young and we remember what our teachers say when we're, forming who we are as humans. But at the same time, sometimes those things stick with us, and they, unconsciously impact the choices that we make and how we engage with other people. And so the other example I'll share is someone who was living with dementia. And I think I shared this story with you when we had our initial meeting. And so this story is really notable because this was somebody whose teacher had said something that seems harmless on the surface, but it continued to stick with him throughout his life. And it was very present in our therapeutic relationship. And it was this individual who, his older brother was a musical prodigy, was very, very talented. And so this person, their music teacher, had made comments about how this person was not as capable as their brother, and in so many words. And he would say it all the time in sessions. And he really enjoyed initially just sitting at the piano with me. And our sessions often started with staff members saying, "Hey, this person's really agitated. He's exit seeking or is not engaging well with other people. Would you please spend some time with him?" And I would take him to the piano, and we would sit at the piano, but he would never touch it. And so finally one day he would just sit there with his hands in his lap, and he would close his eyes, tap his toes, and oftentimes he would have tears streaming down his face, and he would just quietly say, "That's so beautiful." I'm improvising around, I would usually probe during the session, "How are you feeling right now? Where are you?" And then figure out how I can convey that in the music and explore that motif. And then to do a, final check-in at the end. And so one day he was having a particularly challenging time, and they hadn't seen him this agitated. And the nurse said, "Hey, he could really benefit from some time with you." So I took him to the piano, and it was on this day that I decided to try something different, I, had him sitting next to me at the piano, and I just looked at him and I didn't say anything. And I took my index finger and I plunked it down. I think it was an A on the piano, like a high C above. And it was an A. And I just plunked it. And I looked at him and he looked at me and he smiled. And I did it again. And I, non-verbally looked at his finger. And I did it one more time. And he looked at me and he smiled and he plunked the same note. And thus started our improvisation journey. He played an entire piece with me on that day, and it was he had the biggest smile, his shoulders relaxed, but he was so engaged. And anytime he would, like I talked earlier about, like a major second, he played a minor second, I would play that too. I would mirror what he's doing, and that creates that sense of validation. It's really cool. It's this moment of, I see you, I hear you, I'm with you in this moment. And it's so awesome. And at the end of the session, he grabs my hand and he just holds my hand and he says, thank you. And he has this big smile, tears down his face. And he was much more relaxed the rest of the day. And we continued to work together. And I ended up sitting bedside with him as well when he ended up passing last year. I worked with him for almost 2 years. And that was a really notable interaction. I remember that session very well.
Wow, how powerful. The Mather Institute says that there are 3 things that are really helpful for mental health in older adults, and one is agency. And so, by him not playing the piano, that in a way took away part of his voice. And so you kind of helped him to unlock that part of his voice, that's agency, and having the choices, to play. And an achievement is extremely important. And so, being able to participate can be just the sense of achievement. And then, of course, belonging is the third one, or affiliation, and the connection that the two of you had. How beautiful, how beautiful. So you've mentioned it a couple times, and we've had this conversation before, but talk about the role of improvisation, because to me, improvisation is such a creative process, but it's not something you do off the spur of at the moment. That what happens, improvisation is coming from often years of experience and experiencing, and it's kind of what happens in the moment. But talk about the role of improvisation, and you did a little bit in that last example.
Absolutely. And so, one of the courses in my undergrad degree was called clinical improvisation. And so you have all this work leading up to, you've done all your, multiple practicums and proficiencies and countless instrument lessons and recitals. And improvisation in particular, I found 2 quotes that kind of mirrored our conversation the other day, where you said, oh, I'm so used to improvisation in the jazz context. And I said, yeah, that was initially where I was thinking about it too. And so then, on my undergrad training and everything, really shifted that for me. And so the key difference that I think I highlighted last time was the difference between jazz improvisation and clinical improvisation is the therapeutic relationship. It's either present or it's not. So obviously, if you're not working with a music therapist, that's not clinical improvisation. That's likely jazz or some other type of musical improvisation.
Right.
But so Ken Agin I'm going to quote him real quick. He quoted Hiller as saying, this is for clinical music improvisation. So the definition states, clinical music improvisation is the process whereby the therapist and client or clients improvise together for purposes of therapeutic assessment, treatment, and/or evaluation. In clinical improvisation, client and therapist relate to one another through the music, and the improvisation results in a musical product that varies in aesthetic, expressive, and interpersonal significance. There's some good buzzwords in there.
Yep,
And that
yep.
sparks joy for me.
Yeah.
Interpersonal, musical product, and the therapist and client relating to each other. It's that meeting in the music, right? And it's so deeply personal. And the outward perception of improvisation oftentimes makes you think, oh, there's no preparation, you're just off the cuff, especially in thinking about like theatrical improvisation. But I really liked the way you said it the other day, where you talked about, oh, in improvisation, it sounds like you're just making something up, but at the same time, you've practiced all these different motifs, and all your keys and your modes, and you are able to what the situation needs and try it out in a trusting, safe space. And that's why I think improvisation in a clinical setting has the great potential to really promote healing and improve self-expression. So I'm very passionate about improvisation.
Yeah. In my graduate studies, and I'm terrible at remembering the author, but it was introduced to a term called free sense, and he talked about free sense as being when you are so in tune, for musicians, so practiced in your part, and that when you come together, you lose yourself and you're not aware of your part, but you're aware of this larger energy that takes place in the music. And again, I think in your illustration of the individual before, that started with the plunking down on the A, it sounds to me like free sense happened in that moment, that it wasn't so much about what you were doing, what he was doing, but you as the therapist were helping to guide that feeling and participation into something that was larger than the two of you at work. You're doing spiritual work, Liz. That's what spirituality is all about.
Really honored to get to do the work that I do. It can be heavy at times, but it's just such an honor to get to be with people on such a vulnerable level. It's just such an honor for people to trust and to feel safe. The other word I was going to mention really quick, you talked about free sense. That's such a nice word. But catharsis. I have loved that word since undergrad, all those years ago. But catharsis is so neat. And I talk words I use a lot are like tangible and catharsis, making something like our emotions. Yeah. We feel them physiologically and we can intellectualize them and we feel them in our bodies. But when we can make something that does not have a physical form into something that we can understand, whether it's music or art. You could talk about art therapy as well. Art therapists are so cool. I love any of the creative arts therapies. They're really neat. But catharsis, making something that is not physical into something physical or tangible. And I particularly see that a lot in my drum circles that I do on my campuses. And that's really cool. And we could talk about that anytime as well. But sometimes people struggle with emotional expression, especially verbally, right? We talked about this generation of individuals who were not necessarily taught how to express themselves, or were taught, where is it? A book that I had to read in undergrad, it was about music therapy in older adults. And one of the quotes, it was from Claire and Mamat. And they said, although these people may verbalize a desire to express themselves, they do not know how to do so because they did not have role models to imitate. So it's kind of coming alongside somebody and not only encouraging them and saying, it's okay that you feel this way, but then also working with them to identify how they feel. And doing that musically can be really neat, because it's that catharsis piece of, oh, this is how I feel. And then finding a way to put a word to it is that next step. Yeah.
Well, this is all very creative, very cool stuff, and I look forward to further conversations, and particularly to you being and participating with us in the symposium.
Yeah.
As you know, and our listeners know, as we come to the close of all of our conversations, there are 3 questions that we ask our guests. So, are you ready for your 3 questions?
I think so.
Okay. When you think about your own aging, Liz, what has changed about you and what do you like about your older self?
So when I was preparing for these questions, I couldn't help but kind of giggle to myself just because we're talking about aging, and oftentimes aging evokes thoughts and images of people over 65. But all of us, no matter our age, whether we are 10, 27, 45, 89, we're all aging every day. It is a continuous process. And so, me and my 27-year-old wisdom, I think what has changed about me, especially in this job, um, leadership development, especially, is I think I've become more. I think resilient is a good word. Sometimes challenges arise, and I have had to break out of my people pleasing habits. I used to, the word chameleon, I think chameleon's a good one. I worked so hard to be palatable to everybody for a long time and try to be what every conversation I was in, try to like fit myself to be what that conversation needed. And I've started to get more confident in who I am and figure out who is Liz and who is the people pleasing parts of Liz, and then trying to get away from that. If that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. And thank you for the way you began that. We all are aging. The question has nothing to do with the age that we're at now. We are all older than we were in earlier parts of our life. And so thank you for naming that and helping to communicate that. So the next question is, what surprises you about what you're doing at your age right now?
I will be completely honest. It's my job. I I think about, obviously, I love my job, as you can probably surmise from our time together today. I have friends who, talk about, oh, yeah, I'm working a good job and making good money, but I don't know what I really want to do. And then that makes me feel extra grateful that I love what I do every day. I have the great honor to go to my clients' home and help them establish a sense of community. That's pretty cool. And having the opportunity to advocate for music therapy and everything that I do, both in my job and in my volunteer positions. I've got a lot of wonderful opportunities that I'm very grateful for. So I think in where I am right now in my life, I'm grateful that I'm 27 and I'm doing what I love, and that I have such a clear image in my mind of what I want. I'm incredibly grateful and cognizant that that is not something to take for granted.
Great. Yep. And the last one. Is there someone that you've met or someone who's set an example for you that inspires you to age abundantly?
I thought about this question a lot, and I had a couple answers in my mind, and I decided upon one person. I have never met this person, but it is something that is really notable. So her name is Elizabeth Eaton Rosenthal, and people know her as the Green Lady of Brooklyn. And she is 84. She, for the past 20 plus years, has worked to create an entire wardrobe, and the way she decorates her house and everything that she does artistically is green. Green is her life, and that's how she expresses herself. And not only is green my favorite color, that's not why I chose her, but it's just a fun little parallel. But I love so much and I have clients who do this too, who don't care what people think. And I wish other people felt that way too. It does not, you can wear whatever you want. You can have all the piercings and tattoos. You can have pink hair. Be who you are, be authentic. And that doesn't stop when we grow older. being unapologetically yourself. And so that person in particular is kind of this tangible, there's that word again, example of who I would love to be as I continue to grow older, is not worrying so much about outward appearance or about mistakes that I make, because I'm continually learning from mistakes. I think she is a really neat example of somebody who has dedicated her life to being unapologetically herself. And I would really be, I would love to strive to be that way as well.
Well, I'm just grinning because I talked about Mather's 3 A's, achievement, agency, affiliation, and I've added a couple more. One of them is authenticity. I think it's really important for older adults to be authentic to who they are and their life experience. And then the last A that I add is abundance. How do we live from a place of abundance rather than scarcity and decline, particularly in later life? Well, thank you, Liz, for this conversation. We can have many other conversations, and we will in the future. But if anybody wants to be in touch with you, where can they find you?
You can, I work for the Ohio Masonic community, so I do have my email is available. I don't know if that's something we would put in like a chat, or if you want me to, should I say it here?
If you just want to go ahead and say it, that's fine.
Sure. You can email me at eStamm, so it's ESTAMM as in M&Ms, at omcoh.org. And you can also find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm not very active, but I have all my information on there, and I do love to network with other professionals. So
great. Thanks, Liz. And thank you to our listeners for your time in this episode of The Art of Aging, part of the United Church Homes Abundant Aging podcast series. If you would like to participate in additional conversations around the theme of creativity, I invite you to check out our 2025 Symposium, which will take place on October 31st. In 2025, you can join us in person in Lewis Center, Ohio, or online from anywhere. And you can find the registration page on our website at abundantaging.org under events. Or if you are catching this conversation after that date, you can visit our website, abundantaging.org, to explore this topic and more. In the meantime, may you look around you and identify a person who is aging ahead of you and who influences your understanding of how you can age abundantly by their life example. Until next time, thank you for listening.